Imagine yourself 3 years into your Mars mission. You wake in the gentle rust-colored light filtering through your habitat dome. The routine has become familiar now. The low gravity, the recycled air, the distant hum of life support systems. You reach across your workstation for a sample container, a simple gesture you have made thousands of times before. And then you feel it. A sudden, sharp crack. Not the sound of something dropping, but the unmistakable sensation of your own wrist breaking beneath the weight of nothing at all. Your bone has snapped like dried chalk, fractured by a force so mundane it should have been impossible. In that moment, you realize the most dangerous thing on Mars was never the radiation, the dust storms, or the isolation. It was time itself, quietly stealing the foundation of your body while you slept. This is not science fiction. This is the silent catastrophe waiting for every human who dares to call Mars home. And the most unsettling part? Space agencies have known about this for decades. They have measured it, documented it, watched it happen in real time aboard the International Space Station. Yet it remains one of the least discussed barriers to humanity's dream of becoming a multi-planetary species. Not because the science is uncertain, but because the implications are so profound that they challenge everything we imagine about living beyond Earth. Your skeleton is not what you think it is. It is not a static framework, not simply the scaffolding that holds you upright. It is a living organ, constantly breaking itself down and rebuilding, cell by cell, moment by moment. Every day of your life, specialized cells called osteoclasts dissolve tiny portions of your bone tissue, releasing minerals into your bloodstream. At the same time, other cells called osteoblasts lay down fresh bone matrix, replacing what was lost. This cycle, this eternal dance of destruction and creation, is calibrated by millions of years of evolution to function under one specific condition: Earth's gravity. The constant pull of 1G pressing down on your frame, signaling to your bones that they must remain strong, that they must bear weight, that they are needed. Remove that signal and the entire system collapses. On Mars, where gravity is only 38% of Earth's, your bones receive a confused message. They are still working, still bearing some load, but not enough. Not nearly enough to justify their density. And so, your body begins to economize. Why maintain expensive bone tissue when it seems unnecessary? The osteoclasts continue their work, dissolving bone at the same rate they always have. But the osteoblasts, those tireless builders, slow down. They lay down less new bone. The balance tips. Month by month, imperceptibly at first, your skeleton begins to hollow itself out from within. The numbers are staggering. Astronauts aboard the ISS in full microgravity lose bone density at a rate of 1 to 2% per month. That is 10 times faster than osteoporosis in elderly patients on Earth. Hip bones, the femur, the spine, all the load-bearing structures that evolution spent millions of years perfecting, begin to thin like paper. And here is where Mars becomes uniquely treacherous. In zero gravity, you can anticipate the problem. You know your bones are weakening. But on Mars, that partial gravity creates a dangerous illusion. You feel weight. You can walk, jump, move with something close to normalcy. Your body whispers that everything is fine, even as the silent erosion continues beneath your skin. 3 years. That is the threshold where the mathematics of bone loss become unavoidable. The time frame where a round trip to Mars, the absolute minimum for any crewed mission, pushes human physiology into territory we have never tested, beyond monitoring and beyond reversibility perhaps. Beyond the point where exercise and supplements and all our earthbound solutions might be able to save you. Tonight, we are going to journey deep into the architecture of your skeleton. We will explore why gravity is not just a force that holds you down, but a sculptor that has shaped every cell in your body. We will walk through the cutting-edge research happening right now, in labs and in orbit, as scientists race to solve a problem that threatens to ground humanity's greatest dreams. And we will ask the question that keeps space medicine researchers awake at night. If we cannot protect something as fundamental as our bones, what does that mean for our future among the stars? Before we go further, I would love to know where you are right now as we begin this journey together. Leave a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is for you. Are you drifting off to sleep or just beginning your day? Wherever you are, we are traveling this path together. We carry within us a quiet architecture, one so familiar we rarely question its nature. When we think of bones, we imagine permanence. Stone pillars, ancient foundations, something fixed, solid, and unchanging beneath the softness of flesh. But this is a misconception so deeply rooted in our understanding that it shapes everything we believe about our bodies and our limitations. The truth is far stranger, far more elegant, and far more alive than the static framework we imagine. Your bones are not monuments. They are rivers. To understand what happens to human bones on Mars, we must first abandon the comfortable illusion of the skeleton as an inert structure. Bones are not concrete. They are not mineral deposits laid down in childhood and left to harden like fossils throughout our lives. Every bone in your body is dynamic living tissue, threaded with blood vessels that deliver nutrients, woven with nerves that carry sensation, and populated by millions of cells engaged in constant tireless activity. Your skeleton is not merely supporting you, it is rebuilding itself, molecule by molecule, even as you read these words. Within the microscopic landscape of bone tissue exists a hidden civilization of cells, a workforce that never sleeps, never takes leave, and never stops reshaping the very foundation you stand upon. These workers fall into two essential categories, each with a distinct purpose, locked in an eternal dance of creation and destruction. They are called osteoblasts and osteoclasts, and together they perform the most remarkable construction project in the known universe, the continuous renovation of you. Osteoblasts are the builders. Imagine them as master masons working at the molecular level, secreting new bone matrix, laying down fresh layers of calcium and collagen, filling gaps, strengthening walls, responding to signals from the body about where reinforcement is needed. They are meticulous, deliberate, working according to blueprints encoded in your DNA, and modified by the forces you encounter every day. Where stress is applied, osteoblasts respond by building denser, stronger structures. Where strength is needed, they deliver. Osteoclasts are the demolishers. But they are not destroyers in the violent sense. They are recyclers, refiners, sculptors. These cells break down old bone tissue, dissolving the mineral matrix and releasing calcium back into the bloodstream where it can be reused. Without osteoclasts, bones would become brittle monuments to outdated needs. Old fractures would never fully heal. The skeleton would lose its ability to adapt. Osteoclasts clear away the obsolete, making room for the osteoblasts to lay down something better, something suited to the demands of the present moment. This partnership between builder and demolisher is known as bone remodeling, and it is happening everywhere in your body, continuously, without pause. The cycle is elegant in its simplicity. Osteoclasts excavate a small section of bone. Osteoblasts arrive and fill the cavity with new material. The process takes weeks to complete for a single microscopic site. But across your entire skeleton, Millions of these sites are being renovated simultaneously. Over the course of roughly 10 years, your entire skeleton is replaced. The bones you have now are not the bones you had a decade ago. You are rebuilt, piece by molecular piece, by an invisible workforce, responding to forces you may never consciously feel. This is not a flaw in design, it is the design. Bones must be dynamic, because life is dynamic. We do not live in static environments. We climb, we run, we fall, we age. Our skeletons must adapt or fail. And they do adapt brilliantly through a process called mechanotransduction. This is the mechanism by which bones sense mechanical stress and translate that stress into biological signals. When you place weight on a bone, when you run or jump or lift something heavy, the bone experiences tiny deformations. These deformations create electrical signals and trigger fluid movement through microscopic channels in the bone matrix. The osteoblasts and osteoclasts sense these signals and respond accordingly. More stress means more building. Less stress means more removal. Your bones literally grow stronger where you need them and weaken where you do not. This principle is not theoretical, it is visible, measurable, and profound. Consider the tennis player, a professional athlete who has devoted years to perfecting their serve, their forehand, their backhand, always favoring one arm. Studies have repeatedly shown that the bones in a tennis player's dominant arm are significantly denser than those in their non-dominant arm. The humerus, the radius, the ulna, all reinforced, thickened, strengthened by the repetitive mechanical forces of striking a ball thousands of times. The skeleton does not treat both arms equally. It allocates resources based on demand. The dominant arm is subjected to greater stress, and so the bones respond by becoming more robust, more capable of withstanding impact. The non-dominant arm, used less intensively, remains comparatively lighter. This is not a quirk of genetics. It is mechanotransduction at work, the bone responding to the life being lived. What this reveals is that bones are not merely structural. They are intelligent in their own way, not conscious but responsive. They listen to the language of gravity, of force, of movement. Every step you take, every weight you lift, every time you stand or sit or lie down, you are sending signals to your skeleton. And your skeleton is listening. It adjusts, it compensates, it evolves. This responsiveness is what has allowed humans to thrive in countless environments across Earth. From mountain climbers whose leg bones grow denser to support steep ascents, to astronauts whose bones begin to demineralize the moment they leave Earth's gravity, the skeleton is always adapting to the gravitational and mechanical environment it inhabits. But adaptation requires input. Bones need stress to remain strong. They need the constant pull of gravity, the impact of footsteps, the strain of muscles contracting against resistance. Remove these forces, and the balance between osteoblasts and osteoclasts shifts. The demolishers continue their work, but the builders slow down. There is no signal telling them to reinforce. No mechanical stress to translate into biological action. The remodeling cycle, once balanced, tilts toward destruction. Bone density begins to decline. Strength diminishes. The skeleton, no longer needed to support weight or resist force, begins to disappear. This is not a design flaw. It is efficiency. The body does not waste resources maintaining structures it does not need. If the bones are not being used, the body reclaims the calcium, the minerals, the energy. In an earthbound context, this adaptation is rarely a concern. Gravity is constant. Movement is inevitable. But in space, or on a world like Mars where gravity is only a fraction of what we evolved in, this elegant system of mechanotransduction becomes a quiet catastrophe. The bones do not know they are on another planet. They only know they are not being stressed, and so, following billions of years of evolutionary programming, they begin to dismantle themselves, cell by cell, day by day, silently. Your bones are not what you think they are. They are not permanent. They are not passive. They are living, breathing, constantly changing tissues that reflect the forces you encounter and the life you lead. Understanding this is the first step toward understanding the silent, inevitable crisis that awaits any human who dares to live on Mars for more than a few years. The skeleton that carried you there will not be the skeleton that remains. Before we can understand what Mars does to the human body, we must first recognize something profound about our relationship with Earth. Every moment of your life, from your first breath to this very instant, you have been shaped by an invisible force so constant, so unrelenting, that you have never known existence without it. Gravity is not merely holding you down, it is sculpting you, cell by cell, bone by bone, into a being perfectly adapted to precisely 9.8 meters per second squared of acceleration. Your skeleton is not a fixed structure built once and forgotten. It is a living architecture, constantly rebuilding itself in response to the demands placed upon it. In the late 19th century, a German anatomist named Julius Wolff observed something remarkable. He noticed that bone was not passive tissue, but responsive, adaptive, almost intelligent in its behavior. What emerged from his observations became known as Wolff's law, a principle so fundamental to understanding bone biology that it still guides medical science today. The law states simply that bone adapts to the loads placed upon it. Where stress increases, bone grows stronger and denser. Where stress disappears, bone quietly dissolves away, reabsorbed by the body as unnecessary weight. Your skeleton is engaged in a constant conversation with gravity, and gravity speaks through every movement you make. Consider a typical day in your life on Earth. You rise from bed, and in that single motion, your bones receive thousands of signals. The act of standing transfers your body's entire weight through your spine, your hips, your femurs, your tibias, all the way down to the tiny bones of your feet. Each of these bones feels the load. Specialized cells called osteocytes, embedded within the bone matrix like sensors in a vast biological network, detect the subtle deformations caused by your weight. These deformations are microscopic, invisible to any instrument, yet they are enough. The osteocytes respond by signaling other cells, osteoblasts, to lay down new bone material, reinforcing the structure exactly where it is needed most. You walk to the kitchen. With every step, forces ripple through your skeleton. Ground reaction forces, the phenomenon of Earth pushing back against you with equal and opposite force, create impact loads that travel up through your legs. Your heel strikes the ground, and in that instant, your calcaneus bone experiences a stress wave. Your tibia flexes ever so slightly. Your femur bends in ways too subtle to feel but profound enough to trigger cellular responses. These are not injuries. They are signals. They are the language your bones speak with the planet beneath your feet. Even standing still, you are not at rest. Your body sways imperceptibly, making thousands of tiny corrections to maintain balance. Your muscles contract and pull against your bones, creating tension and compression. These constant micro-stresses are interpreted by your skeleton as a message. Stay strong, stay dense, stay ready. Gravity never stops speaking, and your bones never stop listening. This dialogue has been occurring for every second of your life, and for every second of every human life that has ever existed on Earth. We are not merely inhabitants of this planet. We are products of its gravitational field. The beauty of this system is its precision. Bones strengthen exactly where they are needed and no more. Athletes develop denser bones in the limbs they use most. A tennis player's serving arm will have measurably thicker bone than their other arm. Dancers develop extraordinary bone density in their legs and spine. Even the way you walk, the subtle asymmetries in your gait are reflected in the microscopic architecture of your skeleton. Your bones are a map of your life, recorded in calcium and phosphate, shaped by every step you have ever taken. But what happens when gravity's voice falls silent? Astronauts aboard the International Space Station float in microgravity, a condition that is not quite weightlessness but close enough to deceive the human body. In this environment, the constant loading that your bones have known since birth simply vanishes. There are no ground reaction forces. There is no weight pressing down through your spine. The osteocytes, those cellular sensors embedded in bone, detect nothing. And in the absence of stress, they do what evolution has programmed them to do. They signal that the bone is no longer necessary. Osteoclasts, cells that break down bone tissue, begin their work. Calcium dissolves from the bone matrix and floods into the bloodstream. The skeleton, once dense and strong, begins to hollow out from within. The rate of this loss is staggering. Astronauts on the ISS lose between 1 and 2% of their bone density per month, specifically in weight-bearing bones like the spine, hips, and legs. To put this in perspective, consider osteoporosis, a disease that afflicts millions of elderly people on Earth. Patients with osteoporosis lose approximately 1 to 2% of their bone density per year. Space does in 1 month what aging does in 12. In orbit, time itself seems to accelerate, at least for the skeleton. An astronaut spending 6 months in space ages their bones by half a decade. This is not a failure of the human body. It is the body working exactly as designed. Your skeleton is optimized for efficiency. Bone is metabolically expensive to maintain. It requires calcium, phosphorus, energy, resources that a body in microgravity no longer needs to invest in structural support. From an evolutionary perspective, shedding unnecessary bone mass is rational, but rationality offers no comfort when an astronaut returns to Earth with bones so fragile that a simple fall could result in fractures. The implications stretch far beyond the space station. The ISS orbits just 400 kilometers above Earth's surface, a mere whisper away in cosmic terms. Astronauts can return home in hours if needed. Medical care is always within reach. But Mars is not the ISS. Mars is months away, separated from Earth by tens of millions of kilometers of void. And Mars, unlike the microgravity of orbit, has gravity, just not enough. At 38% of Earth's pull, Mars creates a biological dilemma, unlike any humans have faced before. It is strong enough to feel, strong enough to create the illusion of normalcy, but too weak to preserve the skeleton that gravity spent millions of years perfecting. On Mars, your bones will hear gravity's voice, but only as a whisper, a fading echo of the force that built you. And whispers, as we will see, are not enough. For over 2 decades, the International Space Station has orbited Earth, conducting an experiment that we did not fully understand when we began. It is not an experiment of physics or chemistry, but of human fragility. As astronauts float through the corridors of the station, their bodies are being quietly transformed, restructured by the absence of a force so fundamental we rarely notice it exists. Every moment spent in weightlessness is a moment where the skeleton receives a message it has never encountered in millions of years of evolution, that the bones are no longer needed. The research gathered from ISS missions spans hundreds of astronauts and thousands of hours of data. What we have learned is both fascinating and troubling. Bone loss in space is not uniform. It does not affect the skeleton evenly, as though gravity's absence creates a map of vulnerability across the human body. Some bones dissolve rapidly. Others, strangely, grow thicker. The hip bones, spine, and femur, the weight-bearing structures that have supported humanity since we first stood upright, lose density at an alarming rate. On Earth, osteoporosis patients might lose 1 to 2% of bone mass per year. In space, astronauts can lose 1 to 2% per month. The difference is not incremental, it is exponential. The hip and spine deteriorate fastest because they are designed to carry load. Without that constant compression, the osteoclasts, the cells that break down old bone tissue, continue their work, while the osteoblasts, the cells that build new bone, slow dramatically. The skeleton is remodeling itself for an environment without weight. It is adapting, but not in a way that serves us when we return. Meanwhile, something peculiar occurs in the skull. Bone density there actually increases, as though the body, confused by the redistribution of fluids and pressures in microgravity, begins reinforcing the wrong structures. The skull thickens while the legs weaken. It is a transformation that makes sense in zero gravity, but becomes a burden the moment an astronaut steps back onto solid ground. As bones dissolve, they do not simply vanish. The calcium that once formed the rigid architecture of the skeleton floods into the bloodstream. This is not a gentle process. Calcium levels rise, circulating through the body in concentrations never meant to exist in liquid form for extended periods. The kidneys, designed to filter and regulate, become overwhelmed. Calcium begins to crystallize, forming stones that can block the urinary tract, causing excruciating pain. Some astronauts have developed kidney stones during missions, a medical emergency that, in the isolation of space, becomes profoundly dangerous. There is no hospital nearby, no emergency room. The body's breakdown becomes a risk factor not just for the future, but for survival in the present moment. Yet the story of bone loss goes deeper than density measurements alone. For years, scientists used bone density scans to track the health of astronaut skeletons. These scans measure how much mineral is present in the bone, providing a number that seems definitive. But numbers do not tell the whole story. Bone is not a solid structure. It is a lattice, a complex internal framework of struts and supports arranged in patterns that maximize strength while minimizing weight. This microarchitecture, invisible to standard density scans, is what truly determines whether a bone can withstand stress. In space, this intricate scaffolding begins to degrade. The trabeculae, the tiny beam-like structures inside bones, thin and disconnect. Even if bone density appears only moderately reduced, the internal architecture may be catastrophically weakened. A bone that looks nearly normal on a scan might shatter under stress, because its hidden structure has been hollowed out from within. High-resolution imaging techniques have revealed this hidden damage in recent years, and the findings are sobering. Astronauts who spent 6 months on the ISS returned with bones that had lost not just mass, but coherence. The trabecular network, which took years to develop during childhood and adolescence, had begun to dissolve. And here lies the most unsettling discovery of all. It does not simply rebuild when astronauts come home. In 2022, a landmark study tracked astronauts for years after their return to Earth. Researchers expected that with time, exercise, and the constant pull of gravity, bones would regenerate. They would regain their strength, restoring what had been lost. But the data told a different story. Years after returning, many astronauts still had not fully recovered their bone strength. Some bones regained density, yes, but the microarchitecture, the internal lattice that provides resilience, remained compromised. Fractures occurred more easily. Stress that would have been absorbed before spaceflight now resulted in injury. The skeleton had been permanently altered. This led to the formal recognition of a new medical condition, spaceflight osteopenia. It is not osteoporosis, though it shares similarities. It is a distinct pathology, unique to those who have lived beyond Earth's gravity well. The condition acknowledges that bone loss in space is not merely accelerated aging. It is something else entirely. A transformation caused by an environment so foreign to human biology that our bodies, despite millions of years of evolution, have no adaptive response that truly works. The implications ripple outward. If 6 months in orbit causes lasting damage, what would 3 years on Mars do? The Moon, with its weaker gravity, might slow the process slightly, but Mars, at 38% of Earth's gravity, sits in an uncanny middle ground. Enough gravity to confuse the body's signaling pathways, but not enough to preserve the skeleton. Astronauts on Mars would not float, but they would still be losing bone, month after month, as their bodies slowly dismantle the very structures that allow them to stand. Spaceflight osteopenia is not just a medical term. It is a reminder that we are not designed for the stars. Our bones, sculpted by gravity over eons, carry within them the history of a species bound to one world. To leave that world is to leave behind the forces that made us, and the skeleton, silent and hidden beneath skin and muscle, is the first to reveal the cost of that departure. Mars gravity is not a gentle nudge or a complete release. It is something stranger. On the surface of this rust-coloured world, gravity is only about 38% of what you feel on Earth. Not heavy enough to hold you firmly in the familiar embrace of your home planet. Not light enough to free you from weight altogether. It is a compromise written into the rock and dust, a middle ground that may prove far more treacherous than either extreme. On Earth, you may not think about your weight as anything more than a number on a scale. But to your bones, that number is a constant conversation. Each step, each jump, each time you stand up from a chair, you are quietly telling your skeleton, "Stay strong, I still need you." Your bones listen, they respond, they adapt. On Mars, that message becomes a whisper. A person who weighs 150 pounds on Earth would weigh only about 57 pounds on Mars. The math is simple. Multiply your Earth weight by 0.38 and you have your Martian weight. The experience, though, would be anything but simple. Your body would feel strangely light. Walking would be easier. Carrying equipment would seem trivial. Climbing a hill might feel like strolling up a gentle incline. At first, it would be delightful, almost playful, as if the planet itself were helping you along. But in the silent language of biology, that 150 to 57 pound shift has consequences. Your feet meet the ground with less force. Your spine bears less load. Your hips and knees, which on Earth must constantly resist your full weight, now face barely a third of that demand. To your bones, this is information. And the message they begin to receive is, you are not needed as much. This is where Mars becomes the worst of both worlds. In microgravity, like on the International Space Station, The body signal is clear and extreme. There is essentially no weight. Your skeleton quickly understands that the usual compressive forces have vanished. Bone density plummets, and astronauts and doctors know to treat it as a crisis. Exercise regimes are intense. Every day is a deliberate battle against loss. On Mars, the signal is blurred. There is still weight. You can still walk, run, lift, bend. Your muscles contract. Your joints move. Nothing feels completely alien. Your inner ear still senses up and down. You can fall. You can jump. You are not floating. And that is precisely the danger. Partial gravity occupies a deceptive middle. The body gets some mechanical stimulation, but not enough. It is as if your bones are trying to read a half-faded message. They register that there is still gravity, still impact, still motion. But the force is diminished, too weak to fully trigger the rebuilding and reinforcement that Earth's gravity demands. Most of the daily activities that keep your skeleton quietly healthy on Earth become insufficient on Mars without you even realizing it. Standing, which on Earth constantly loads your spine and hips, becomes gentler, less demanding. Walking no longer sends firm, bone-strengthening shocks through your legs. Running becomes almost like gliding. Even lying down and getting up are easier. Each of these acts, once powerful instructions to maintain dense, sturdy bone, become muted suggestions. Your bones are exquisitely tuned to threshold. They respond not just to movement, but to the intensity of the load. Below a certain level, the stimulus might as well not exist. Over millions of years, evolution calibrated that threshold to Earth's pull, to the exact one your ancestors felt every moment of their lives. Mars offers only 0.38 grams, and your bones, bound to Earth's expectations, may interpret this as a world in which strength is no longer strictly necessary. There is a temptation to imagine that any gravity is better than none. That spending years in 38% gravity must be safer than drifting in orbit with none at all. But the truth is, we do not know. The space station has taught us much about bones in microgravity, how fast they thin, how quickly calcium floods the bloodstream and leaves through the urine, how fragile the skeleton becomes without constant loading. These effects are real, measured, documented. For partial gravity, the story is still unwritten. We have hints from short-duration studies. Astronauts on the Moon experienced 1/6 Earth gravity, but only for days at a time. Some centrifuge experiments and animal models suggest that bones need a surprisingly high fraction of Earth's gravity to stay healthy. But we have no direct data on what happens to a human skeleton after years in 38% gravity. No one has lived on Mars. No one has even lived for more than brief moments in a sustained artificial gravity that perfectly mimics Mars. This gap in our knowledge is not a small missing detail. It is a chasm at the center of our plans for Mars. We can simulate. We can model. We can guess that bone loss might be slower in 0.38 G than in 0 G, but still relentless. Perhaps it levels off at a lower density, leaving colonists permanently more fragile, more prone to fractures from falls that would be trivial on Earth. Or perhaps certain bones, hips, spine, femur, suffer more than others as the body tries to redistribute what little load remains. We can imagine scenarios, but we cannot yet confirm them. The most unsettling possibility is that Mars' gravity is just enough to feel normal, but not enough to protect you. You would wake up, walk, work, climb ladders, dig in the soil, exercise, and feel that you are using your body fully. Nothing in your day would obviously tell you that your bones were quietly losing ground. The illusion of normality would be powerful. Only scans, blood tests, and years of careful tracking would reveal the truth, that your skeleton was adapting to a less demanding world, slowly sculpting itself into something lighter, thinner, more efficient for Mars, but dangerously brittle if you ever tried to return to Earth. In this dangerous middle zone, the problem is not only physical, it is psychological. Microgravity is obviously strange. It demands caution and discipline. Mars gravity would feel almost comfortable, and in that comfort, risk can hide. We stand at an odd crossroads. We dream of cities beneath Martian skies, of children born in lower gravity, of generations who will know 0.38 g as their natural state. Yet we still do not know whether that gravity is enough to sustain healthy bones over decades, or whether Mars itself quietly invites the human skeleton into a slower, subtler kind of decay. Between weightlessness and the firm pull of Earth, Mars waits, offering something in between. Not a relief, not a refuge, but a question. A world where every step feels easy, and every year may carry a hidden cost. The journey to Mars is not a single leap. It is a long, drawn-out unfolding of time. When people imagine standing on the red sands, they often picture the arrival. But the danger we are talking about lives in the spaces in between. The months in the ship, the months on the surface, the months on the way home. Together, they form a quiet countdown inside your skeleton. A realistic mission to Mars is not a quick visit. Even with favourable planetary alignment and efficient propulsion, the outbound trip alone takes about 6 to 9 months. During that time, you exist in microgravity, where your bones no longer feel the constant pull that has shaped them since birth. Then, once you land, you cannot turn around and leave immediately. Mars and Earth dance around the Sun at different speeds. We have to wait for them to realign in a way that makes the return journey possible. That waiting period is long. Most mission designs plan for roughly 18 months on the Martian surface, 18 months of living at just 38% of Earth's gravity. Not weightless, not normal, but something in between. Not enough pull to fully maintain your bones, yet enough that every step still loads your weakened skeleton. Then comes the trip home. Another 6 to 9 months drifting between worlds. When you add it all together, a full Mars mission is not a year or even 2. It stretches to nearly 3 years. 3 years in which your bones are never truly home. We can think of this time in 3 chapters. The first, the ship. Here, your bones experience the steepest change. In microgravity, astronauts on the International Space Station can lose around 1 to 2% of bone mass in critical regions per month, especially in the hips, spine, and legs. The second, Mars. The loss rate may slow, but it does not stop. The body senses that gravity is weaker and adjusts downward, building less, resorbing more. The third, the return trip. Bones already thinned now re-enter weightlessness, and the process accelerates again. At first glance, you might imagine bone loss as a simple straight line, a little bit gone each month, like sand slipping through an hourglass. But bone is more complex, more stubborn, and more fragile than that. The decline is not always linear. Without strong, continuous loading, bone resorption can outpace bone formation in a self-reinforcing cycle. Microscopically, bone is alive with remodeling crews. Cells that break down old or damaged bone. Cells that lay down fresh mineral scaffolding. On Earth, these teams stay in balance, tuned by the signals of muscles pulling against bone, by the subtle bends and strains of daily life. In low gravity, those signals change. The message becomes, we don't need as much strength here. As density drops, the architecture inside the bone begins to shift. The fine trabecular struts in the hips and vertebrae thin and sometimes break. Once that internal lattice is damaged, future forces concentrate on fewer remaining struts, which then break more easily. Loss begets more loss. Over time, some models suggest that the curve of bone strength does not simply slope downward. It bends, steepening as the structure weakens. Researchers use these models to ask a difficult question. When does a strong, healthy astronaut skeleton cross an invisible line and become critically fragile? To answer, they start with terrestrial data. Older adults on Earth with osteoporosis show specific fracture thresholds, bone mineral density values below, which the risk of breaking a hip or vertebra does not just rise, it rises rapidly. Then they overlay spaceflight data, months in orbit, measured bone loss, partial recovery after return. From these layers, estimates emerge. If an astronaut loses, say, 1% of bone density per month during microgravity periods, and a somewhat slower but still significant fraction during Mars surface time, then somewhere around the 2 to 3 year mark, critical weight-bearing bones, hips, femurs, spine, begin to approach those fracture thresholds. The numbers vary between individuals. Genetics, age, sex, nutrition, exercise, and radiation exposure all shift the curve. But again and again, the red zone appears near that 3-year horizon. What does it actually mean for bones to crumble? Medically, they do not fall apart like dry sandstone. The danger is quieter. It is the rising probability that a sudden load, tripping over a rock, jumping down from a rover step, bracing during a fall in partial gravity, will exceed what the weakened structure can bear. Inside the bone, microfractures begin to appear. Tiny cracks in the trabecular network, hairline stress failures in the cortical shell. On Earth, the body can usually keep up, repairing these micro-injuries as fast as they form. In reduced gravity, with slower remodeling and fewer mechanical cues, repairs lag. Cracks accumulate, like unseen fissures in a dam wall. At first you might never notice. No sharp pain, no dramatic event. Just a bone that is slightly less stiff, slightly less resilient with each passing month. But as density drops and micro-damage spreads, the entire structure approaches a tipping point. Past that point, a fracture is no longer a rare accident. It becomes statistically likely. A simple misstep could send forces through a hip that 3 years earlier would have been harmless, but now exceed the bone's reduced strength. The phrase exponential here is not poetic exaggeration. In fracture risk models, once bone density crosses certain thresholds, the risk curve steepens sharply. A small additional loss in density can double or triple the chance of a serious break. For a Mars crew member, this is the true meaning of crumbling, a skeleton that is mathematically, not just metaphorically, on the edge. When mission planners talk about this 3-year threshold, they do so with caution. We do not yet have a human who has spent 3 continuous years in combined microgravity and partial gravity and then tested their bones under Martian loads. Our data comes from shorter missions, bed rest studies on Earth, animal experiments, and computer simulations. Every step in that chain adds uncertainty. Some individuals may be more resilient than the models predict. Others could be more vulnerable. Countermeasures, exercise, nutrition, pharmaceuticals, may slow the decline more than we currently expect. Or new stressors like chronic radiation exposure may worsen it. The curve of risk is drawn in pencil, not ink. Yet the concern is real. It comes not from fear, but from patterns we have already seen. We know that even 6 months in orbit can strip away years of bone health, and that full recovery is slow and sometimes incomplete. We know that partial gravity does not fully protect the skeleton, and we know that a Mars mission, almost by definition, pushes humans close to that 3-year frontier. In that sense, the 3-year mark is less a hard wall and more a faint line on the map, a region where our confidence in safety begins to blur. On one side lies what we have already tested. On the other side lies the unknown behavior of bones under a prolonged, unfamiliar sky. As we imagine humans walking on Mars, it is tempting to focus on the horizon, the mountains, the dust storms. But for the people who will go, another landscape is changing in parallel, hidden beneath skin and muscle. A landscape of slowly thinning beams and expanding hollow spaces. The 3-year threshold is the moment when that inner terrain may no longer be able to quietly bear the weight of exploration. And so, before we commit to such journeys, we must ask, how close to that line are we willing to travel, knowing that each additional month away from Earth's pull is another small step toward a skeleton that might fail when it is needed most? Long before we set foot on Mars, we tried to tame weightlessness in a more modest arena, a metal cylinder drifting a few hundred kilometers above Earth. The International Space Station is not just a laboratory, it is a rehearsal, a place where we have asked a simple question over and over again. Can we persuade the human body to ignore the absence of gravity? Our main answer so far has been movement. On the ISS, astronauts do not simply squeeze in a quick workout between experiments. Exercise is itself one of the most important experiments. For more than 2 hours every day, their schedules bend around a ritual of resistance and repetition, not for vanity, but for survival. In one corner of the station sits a machine that looks less like a gym device and more like a piece of industrial scaffolding. The Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, or ARED, is our attempt to recreate the invisible pressure of Earth's gravity using pistons, vacuum cylinders, and carefully tuned resistance. Here, astronauts perform squats, deadlifts, heel raises, and bench presses while floating, their feet strapped to a platform that does its best to pretend it is a floor. On Earth, every step you take pushes your skeleton gently but firmly against the planet. On the ISS, ARED tries to imitate this with mechanical force. When an astronaut drives upward in a squat, the machine pulls back, loading their hips and spine, asking their bones the same question Earth would ask. Are you strong enough? Alongside ARED, there are treadmills with harnesses that press the body downward, and cycle ergometers where legs churn in circles against steady resistance. The regimen is strict, structured, and unrelenting. Many astronauts are in the best shape of their lives in orbit. Their muscles swell with work. Their lungs adapt to the daily strain. And yet, beneath the surface, something quieter is happening. Even with this intense routine, even with carefully designed exercise plans and daily discipline, bone still melts away. Not everywhere, and not at the same rate. Weight-bearing bones, hips, spine, pelvis, the long bones of the legs, remain stubbornly sensitive to the absence of real gravity. Astronauts often lose 1 to 2% of bone mineral density per month in some regions during long-duration missions, despite doing all the right things. Exercise slows the erosion. It redirects the tide, but it does not completely stop it. When they return to Earth, many astronauts regain much of that lost bone over time, but not always in the same way they had it before. Some of the new bone is laid down with a slightly different architecture, like a wall rebuilt in a hurry after a storm. Strong enough, perhaps, but not identical. Over years and missions, the story becomes complex. Gains, losses, partial recoveries. The body adapts, but it never entirely forgets that it once floated free. On a 3-year journey to Mars and back, those small percentages accumulate. A fraction per month becomes a large fraction over dozens of months, and exercise that is good enough for 6 months in orbit may not be good enough when time stretches out into years. Part of the challenge is physical. Machines like ARED are heavy, bulky, and intricate. On the ISS, launched piece by piece with the help of powerful rockets and assembled in the gentle cradle of microgravity, this is acceptable. On a Mars-bound spacecraft, every kilogram of equipment must be argued for. Every watt of power must be shared. Every moving part is a future maintenance task waiting patiently in the dark. To truly protect bones on a multi-year mission, we would likely need even more capable resistance systems. Greater loads, more variety of movement, more frequent training. But each escalation adds mass, complexity, and risk. Hydraulic cylinders can leak. Cables can fray. Electronic controllers can fail. On a months-long voyage between worlds, spare parts are not a short flight away. A broken machine stays broken until the crew can improvise a repair or do without. Even when the hardware behaves perfectly, the human body remains negotiable, not obedient. It adapts not just to the absence of gravity, but also to the presence of the countermeasures themselves. In a sense, the body begins to regard daily exercise as the new normal environment. What once was a powerful stimulus becomes routine, and routine is something biology is very good at trimming down. To supplement exercise, medicine has offered another ally: drugs developed on Earth for fragile bones. Bisphosphonates, a class of medications commonly used to treat osteoporosis, work by slowing the activity of cells that break down bone. On our planet, they are a shield against age, immobility, and hormonal change. In space, they have been tested as an additional layer of armor against microgravity. Some astronauts who took bisphosphonates in combination with rigorous exercise appeared to lose less bone than those who relied on exercise alone. The drugs, in essence, told bone-resorbing cells to quiet down, to be less eager to dissolve the mineral scaffold. For short missions, this pharmacological whisper can be helpful. But the story is not simple. Bisphosphonates do not build new bone. They primarily preserve what is already there, and their effects can vary from person to person. They also carry potential side effects when used over long periods: changes in bone quality, rare but serious jaw complications, disturbances in mineral balance. On a 3-year mission, far from comprehensive medical care, the trade-offs become more delicate. We are also still learning how these drugs behave when the entire hormonal, cardiovascular, and mechanical environment of the body has shifted into an unfamiliar state. What we observe over 6 or 12 months cannot yet fully predict what will happen over 36. Alongside drugs and heavy machines, another idea has shimmered at the edges of research: vibration. Low magnitude, high-frequency vibration platforms, devices that make the body gently tremble dozens of times per second, have been studied on Earth as a possible way to stimulate bones without heavy loads. The logic is elegant. Tiny mechanical signals might wake up bone-forming cells, reminding them that the skeleton is still in use, even when muscles are not straining under big weights. In some terrestrial studies, especially in children or certain patient groups, these platforms have shown hints of benefit: modest improvements in bone density, small signals of promise. This has led to experiments in space, where vibration devices are attractive because they can, in theory, be more compact than full-scale resistance machines. But the results have been mixed. Some trials suggest limited or no significant protection, especially in healthy adults. The ideal frequency, duration, and timing remain uncertain. And as with all things in altered gravity, what works under Earth's constant pull may behave differently when that pull fades. Taken together, exercise, drugs, vibration, our current tools form a patchwork rather than a fortress. They slow the loss, they redirect some of the damage, but they do not fully restore the ancient contract between bone and planet. The deeper difficulty lies in time. On the ISS, most missions last around 6 months. A year-long stay is rare, and even that pushes against the edges of what we understand. Countermeasures have largely been designed, tested, and refined within these windows. They ask, how do we keep someone reasonably healthy for half a year, maybe a bit longer, and then bring them home to Earth's gravity, where recovery can continue? A Mars mission reverses that question. It asks, how do we keep someone's skeleton not just intact, but functional through months of microgravity, then years in reduced Mars gravity, and then another long coast home, so that when they finally step back into Earth's full embrace, their bones do not fail beneath them? Over such spans, the body does more than respond. It renegotiates. Muscles that are constantly exercised become efficient, not maximal. Bones that are protected by drugs may change their internal structure in subtle ways. The nervous system recalibrates balance and posture around a different gravitational script. Even the habits of the crew, their sleep, their nutrition, their daily rituals, become part of the equation. In the beginning, our countermeasures are a shock. New forces, new signals, new demands. Over years, they become background noise. The body learns to live with them, and when it learns, it also learns how to economize. It may decide that, even with all our equipment and all our pills, the skeleton does not need to be quite as dense, quite as heavy, quite as redundant as it was on Earth. Current countermeasures buy us time. They hold the line for months, perhaps for a year or two. But the further we push into the timeline of a Mars mission, the more the line begins to blur. What we have now was built for visits. What we need for Mars must be built for habitation. In that widening gap, between what we can delay and what we cannot yet truly prevent, lies the quiet, stubborn problem of bones on Mars. On Earth, we like simple equations. Eat better, move more, get stronger. If your doctor worries about your bones, they tell you to lift weights, go for a run, climb some stairs. And for the most part, it works. But the human skeleton is not obeying a motivational slogan. It is following a set of quiet, microscopic rules. On Mars, and in deep space, those rules begin to turn against us. To understand why exercise alone cannot save our bones, we have to shrink down past muscles and tendons, past the hard white surface of bone, and into the living network hidden inside. Bones are not stone. They are a city. Within this city, the most important inhabitants are not the builders or the demolishers, but the sentries. These are the osteocytes. Osteocytes are former bone-building cells that have become embedded in the very tissue they helped create. Each one lives in a tiny cavity, connected to its neighbours through a vast web of microscopic canals. Together, they form a three-dimensional communication network that threads through every part of your skeleton. If you could listen to this network, it would sound like constant status updates. Too much strain here, not enough strain there. Reinforce this region, thin that one out. This is mechanotransduction, the process by which cells turn physical forces into biological instructions. When you take a step on Earth, your leg bones bend by a fraction of a millimeter. That tiny deformation pushes and pulls fluid through the channels surrounding osteocytes. The cells feel this movement like the wind shifting around a weather vane. Ion channels open. Chemical messengers surge. Genes turn on and off. The message echoes outward. Add bone here, preserve bone there, remodel this area to match how the body is being used. Mechanotransduction is not about how strong you feel. It is about what the cells experience. A gentle jump that bends a bone suddenly may send a louder signal than lifting a heavy weight very slowly. The skeleton listens not just to the amount of force, but to its rhythm, its peaks, its surprises. On Earth, that variety comes for free. We walk on uneven ground. We twist, stumble, climb, step off curbs, run up hills. We change direction without thinking, and every variation sends a slightly different pattern of strain through our bones. The osteocytes stay alert because the story is always changing. In space, that story becomes monotonous. Replacing gravity with exercise seems straightforward. Put a treadmill on the International Space Station. Strap astronauts down with bungee cords. Add stationary bicycles and resistance machines. Let muscles pull on bones to mimic Earth. Yet, despite hours of daily training, the skeleton continues to thin. The reason lies in the language of mechanotransduction. Bones respond best to brief, unexpected, high-impact loads. A landing from a jump, a quick change in direction, a sharp, sudden spike in force that bends the bone for a moment and then lets it rest. On Earth, running and jumping are perfect examples of this type of stimulus. Each foot strike is a pulse of information to the osteocytes. The world is heavy, reinforce the structure. In microgravity or low gravity, those pulses fade. Even with treadmill harnesses, the loading is often more constant and less jarring. The body is pulled down, but not with the same crisp impact of a real step on solid ground. Resistance machines provide force, but in smooth, controlled arcs. The skeleton hears a slower, more predictable song. Over time, it begins to tune it out. This is another hidden feature of bone biology: desensitization. Osteocytes are not simply always-on sensors. They adapt. When a particular pattern of strain repeats over and over again, the response gradually weakens. The same exercise, performed the same way, starts to produce less and less of an anabolic or bone-building signal. It is as though the cell network says, "We have already adjusted to this. There is nothing new to report." On Earth, we unconsciously avoid this problem by changing our movement patterns. We walk one day, sprint another, take the stairs at a different angle, lift a box sideways, reach for a high shelf. Play, work, and random daily tasks constantly scramble the strain patterns running through our skeleton. Even if we do repetitive exercise like distance running, the rest of life adds enough noise to the signal to keep the osteocytes engaged. In space, and even on Mars, life is cleaner and more controlled. Surfaces are smoother, paths are straighter, movements are more deliberate. The exercise devices are few, and the routines are planned. The bones hear repetition, not novelty. The more astronauts rely on a fixed set of exercises, the more efficiently their bones learn to ignore those inputs. And then there is the damage we cannot feel at all. Beyond Earth's magnetic shield, space is filled with ionizing radiation. High-energy particles that pass through the body like tiny bullets, Recent research suggests that osteocytes are particularly vulnerable to this invisible storm. Radiation can fragment their delicate projections, disrupt their communication pathways, or trigger their death. When enough osteocytes are lost or injured, the skeleton loses some of its ability to sense strain in the first place. Imagine trying to keep a city running when half the traffic sensors at intersections are broken. The signals are weaker, more confusing, less reliable. You could increase the traffic, add more cars, more movement, but the system that interprets those patterns is compromised. In the same way, even if astronauts exercise more intensely, radiation-damaged osteocytes may not fully register the load. The response is blunted. Bone continues to thin, even as effort increases. This combination of muted signals and cellular injury creates a kind of biological irony. The forms of exercise that send the clearest bone-building messages on Earth, running, jumping, bounding side to side, are exactly the kinds of impact loads that are hardest to recreate beyond our planet. In microgravity, you cannot truly land because you never truly fall. On Mars, with only about a third of Earth's gravity, every step presses you into the ground, with only a fraction of the force your skeleton evolved to expect. To simulate an Earth-like impact, you would need harnesses, springs, or centrifuges strong enough to pull the body down with artificial weight. But these systems come with their own constraints. They can cause discomfort, restrict movement, or concentrate pressure in awkward ways. Instead of the rich, varied, playful loading we evolved with, the skeleton receives carefully engineered, narrow bands of strain, enough to help, but not enough to fully replace a planet. As months become years, exercise shifts from being a natural conversation between movement and bone to a negotiated truce. We can slow loss, change its pattern, and protect some regions better than others. But the fundamental context remains different. The orchestra of forces that sculpted our skeleton on Earth, gravity, impact, variety, surprise, is thinned to a smaller ensemble. Bones do not simply answer the question, "Are you exercising?" They ask, "How are you loading me? How often? How suddenly? From what direction? With what rest in between?" In deep space and on Mars, our answers to those questions grow less convincing. And so, despite our best machines and our strictest training schedules, we find there are limits we cannot cross with willpower alone. The biology of mechanotransduction, the sensitivity of osteocytes, and the quiet erosive touch of radiation all conspire to remind us. Exercise is not a cure-all. It is just one voice in a conversation our bones are having with gravity itself. To protect a human skeleton on Mars is to attempt something our species has never done before. To edit the invisible language of gravity itself. We cannot make Mars heavier. We cannot ask its weak pull to grow stronger for our sake. So instead, scientists and engineers are trying to bend everything else around this unchangeable fact. Metal, genes, medicines, even the quiet currents of electricity that flow through our cells. One of the oldest dreams is also one of the boldest, artificial gravity. Not by magic, but by motion. If you spin a habitat, the floor becomes the outside of a circle, and rotation presses you against it, mimicking the downward tug we know on Earth. In science fiction, this looks simple, a great ring turning in the dark. In reality, it is a puzzle built from equations and limitations. To generate Earth-like gravity, the habitat must either spin very fast or be very large. Spin too quickly, and the body begins to notice. Your inner ear, tuned to subtle accelerations, becomes confused. Up and down blur into nausea and disorientation. Make the ring larger, and the spin can slow to a gentle turn that the body hardly notices. But now you have to launch and assemble a colossal structure in space or on Mars, far bigger than anything we have ever built beyond Earth. Even if we solve the engineering, another question lingers, quiet and persistent. How much gravity do bones truly need? Is Mars 1/3 enough if it is constant? Would half gravity preserve most skeletal strength? Does it have to be full Earth gravity? Or can we visit it in short daily doses, like a medicine? Small centrifuges, just big enough for a sleeping pod, or a single person curled in a chair, are being designed to test this. Short bouts of increased gravity each day might remind the bones that they are still needed. But we do not yet know the rhythm or duration that would keep a skeleton whole for years. If we cannot easily change the outside force, perhaps we can change the inside response. Some researchers are looking not to steel and spinning rings, but to the code written inside each cell. Bone is constantly remodeled by two kinds of cells, osteoclasts that dissolve old bone, and osteoblasts that build new bone. In microgravity, this balance tips toward loss. Gene therapy proposes a radical shift. What if we could adjust the genes that control these cells, nudging them toward building rather than breaking down? We already know of pathways that influence bone strength, signals like sclerostin, RANKL, and WNT that whisper instructions to osteoblasts and osteoclasts. On Earth, rare genetic variations make some people naturally denser boned, more resistant to fractures, almost as if wearing a hidden armor. In theory, a carefully targeted gene therapy could grant astronauts a temporary version of this advantage, turning up the volume on formation, dialing down the rate of loss. But genes are not simple switches. They are networks. Change one instruction, and others may shift in response. Will denser bones come at the cost of brittle ones? Will altering bone turnover alter immune function, or heart health, or the brain's delicate chemistry? Delivering gene therapy safely, reversibly, and predictably in a human who is months from Earth is a problem that cannot be rushed. While gene therapy lies on the horizon, medicines already in use for osteoporosis are being re-evaluated for space. Drugs that silence overactive osteoclasts, such as bisphosphonates, have already flown on missions, blunting some of the bone loss seen in orbit. Others, like monoclonal antibodies that block sclerostin or RANKL, act as more precise messengers, telling the skeleton to keep what it has. Then there are drugs that encourage osteoblasts to build. Parathyroid hormone analogues are newer anabolic agents that gently push bone-forming cells into higher gear. On Earth, they can increase bone mineral density and reduce fractures in vulnerable patients. In space, they might be used not just to slow the fall, but to push back against it. Yet medicines are never a free gift. Anti-resorptive drugs can, over the long term, produce bones that are dense but less adaptive, more like glass than wood. Anabolic drugs can strain calcium balance, or stress other organs. All of them must be stored, transported, dosed, and carefully monitored in an environment where a delayed shipment is measured not in days, but in months. A Mars mission cannot depend on emergency resupply. Beyond chemistry, another frontier is quieter still: bioelectric stimulation. Our bones are not only mineral and collagen, they are also piezoelectric. When they are bent or compressed, tiny electrical charges ripple through their structure, guiding cells on where to build and where to reinforce. Some scientists are experimenting with devices that gently stimulate bone with low-level electrical or electromagnetic fields, imitating the natural signals of weight and strain. Early studies hint that these subtle currents can encourage healing fractures to knit faster, or bones to maintain density under reduced load. The idea for Mars is alluring: lightweight patches or implants that whisper to the skeleton, "You are still needed, stay strong." But the results are still young, scattered, and not yet tested over the long, slow years a Martian colony would demand. Amid these complex technologies, one intervention is deceptively simple. Food. Calcium, vitamin D, and protein are the basic materials that bone requires. Without them, no gene, drug, or centrifuge can fully succeed. In space, appetites change, taste dulls, and the routine of meals is easily disrupted by the strangeness of weightlessness and the demands of the mission. Nutritional plans for Mars must become precise instruments, not afterthoughts, balancing enough calcium without calcifying blood vessels, enough vitamin D without tipping into toxicity, enough protein without overburdening kidneys already adjusting to altered fluid shifts. Even before the journey begins, another concept is emerging: bone banking. If we know that a 3-year mission to Mars will inevitably draw down the skeleton's reserves, perhaps we can start that mission with extra reserves to lose. Just as athletes build muscle before a grueling season, astronauts could spend years deliberately increasing their bone density, using tailored exercise, diet, and possibly short-term medications to pack extra mineral into their skeletons. We already know that bones can thicken in response to repeated, heavy loading. Gymnasts, for example, often carry denser bones in their arms and legs. Extending that principle, pre-mission loading could create a buffer, a margin of safety. Yet thicker bone is heavier bone, and every extra kilogram must be launched out of Earth's gravity well. There are also limits. Bone cannot be increased indefinitely without risking unusual stresses on joints or the fine balance of marrow and mineral. Each of these strategies, artificial gravity, gene therapy, pharmaceuticals, bioelectric stimulation, precision nutrition, and bone banking, offers a fragment of hope, a piece of a larger puzzle. But none of them, alone, is yet ready to promise that your bones will emerge from 3 years on Mars untouched. The challenges are not only technical, they are temporal. Bones change slowly. Their story is written in months and years, not days. To know if a solution truly works, we must wait, measure, and observe over spans of time that match the missions we dream of. For now, space medicine stands at a threshold. We have tools that can slow the erosion, redirect the currents, and perhaps one day rewrite the rules. But Mars demands more than partial victories. It asks for a complete partnership between physics and biology, between the unyielding pull of a smaller planet and the stubborn desire of human bones to remember the weight of home. The story of bone loss on Mars does not end at the skeleton. It begins there. Bones are not quiet relics buried beneath skin and muscle. They are active, living organs that speak to every other system in the body. When Mars gently steals density from your skeleton, it is not just chiseling away at your frame. It is adjusting the settings of your entire physiology. Where bone goes, muscle follows. On Earth, each step is a negotiation between weight, gravity, and strength. Your muscles pull on your bones push back, and together they form a single, interdependent machine, the musculoskeletal system. In Martian gravity, that dialogue becomes a whisper. With less weight to support, the muscles no longer need to generate the same force. Fibers shrink. Strength ebbs away. At first, the change is subtle. A jar feels slightly heavier than you remember. Your legs tire more quickly after climbing a small incline of rust-colored dust. Over months, the shift becomes unmistakable. Quadriceps, calves, the deep stabilizing muscles along your spine, all of them begin to surrender to the new environment. Bones thin because muscles no longer tug on them as hard. Muscles atrophy because bones no longer demand their service. Each loss feeds the next in a self-reinforcing loop. On Mars, this cascade is not a dramatic collapse. It is a slow unbraiding of resilience. The body that once bounded upstairs on Earth becomes a body that plans every motion carefully, not out of laziness, but out of quiet necessity. Every stumble risks more than a bruise, a bone less dense, a muscle less responsive, a reaction time slightly dulled by chronic fatigue. Together, they turn simple movements into calculated acts. As bones relinquish their minerals to the bloodstream, another story unfolds at the microscopic level. Calcium, once locked safely within the matrix of your skeleton, begins to wander. Bone cells, no longer receiving the familiar signals of Earth's load-bearing demands, release more calcium than the body can comfortably use to rebuild. Blood calcium rises. The kidneys, acting as tireless filters, are suddenly asked to handle this excess. In the darkness of the Martian night, unseen crystals begin to grow. Tiny calcium deposits form within the kidneys, the first seeds of stones. At first, they are too small to notice. Over time, as weeks turn into years, they can aggregate into painful obstructions, sharp reminders that the body is struggling to find a new balance. In the confined habitat of a Martian outpost, where medical intervention is limited and emergency evacuation is impossible, a kidney stone is not a minor inconvenience. It is a serious risk. The wandering calcium does not only trouble the kidneys. Some of it can quietly embed itself where it does not belong. In blood vessel walls, in heart valves, in soft tissues that were never meant to harden. This process, called calcification, is slow and often silent, unfolding over years. On Earth, it can contribute to cardiovascular disease. On Mars, where radiation, altered metabolism, and reduced gravity are already rewriting the rules of physiology, this subtle stiffening of vessels may further compromise a system already under strain. Deep inside your bones lies another world affected by these changes. The bone marrow. It is not just a structural filler, but the cradle of the cells that patrol your body for invaders. Red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, all are born in this quiet, sheltered environment. As bone structure shifts, so too can the landscape in which these cells are formed. Microgravity studies in orbit have already shown that immune function becomes disordered. Some immune cells become overactive, others sluggish. Inflammation markers rise. Astronauts can develop strange rashes, increased allergy-like responses, and altered reactions to infections. On Mars, with partial gravity, chronic stress, isolation, and a slowly remodeling skeleton, bone marrow may be forced into a new operating mode we do not entirely understand. A thinning bone is not only weaker, it may also be a different kind of factory. Subtle shifts in the marrow's environment can change which immune cells are made, how they mature, and how effectively they respond. Over years, this may translate into a body that catches infections more easily, recovers more slowly, and responds less predictably to injury. In a world where a simple cut must be managed carefully, because dust is everywhere and sterilization is a constant battle, any decrease in immune reliability becomes another hidden cost of lowered gravity. As these changes unfold within bone, muscle, and marrow, the cardiovascular system is adjusting in parallel. On Mars, your heart does not need to work as hard to lift blood against gravity. At first, this feels like a relief. The heart can relax. The veins in your legs are less burdened. Over time, the heart muscle itself may remodel, much like skeletal muscle, to meet the reduced demand. In microgravity, we see that the heart becomes more spherical, slightly smaller, adapted to a world where up and down, have lost their meanings. In Mars, gravity, the adaptation may be more subtle, somewhere in between Earth and orbit. But the trend is similar. Reduce load, reduce strength. When you stand up quickly, your blood pressure may drop more than it should. Dizziness, lightheadedness, even fainting are not merely awkward. They are dangerous in a habitat full of hard, unforgiving surfaces and delicate equipment. Blood volume can shift as well. With less gravitational pull pooling blood in the legs, the body gradually decides it can manage with less circulating fluid. This makes the system efficient for Mars, but fragile when challenged. A minor injury leading to blood loss, a sudden illness, or a demanding emergency task outside the habitat could push a deconditioned cardiovascular system to its limits. Physical fragility does not remain confined to the body. It seeps into the mind. The knowledge that your skeleton is thinning, your muscles are shrinking, and your heart is quietly adapting to a weaker baseline is not easy to ignore. On Earth, you might be aging gently, surrounded by familiar comforts. On Mars, you are far from home, immersed in red dust, in a place where every misstep has higher stakes. Psychologically, the sense of being physically diminished can become its own weight. Colonists may begin to move more cautiously, not only because their bodies demand it, but because their confidence erodes. The memory of their Earth-strength self becomes a kind of ghost. The body that could run, jump, lift, and recover. Now, a fall is not just embarrassing, it is frightening. A fracture on Mars is not a simple break. It is the potential beginning of a long, uncertain recovery in a world that pushes against healing. This awareness can colour daily life. Planning an excursion becomes an exercise in risk management. Choosing to lift a heavy object, to explore a little farther from the habitat, to respond to an alarm in the night. All of these moments are filtered through the quiet calculation. Can my body handle this? For some, this leads to careful wisdom. For others, it can shadow the joy of exploration with a persistent undercurrent of vulnerability. Over 3 years, the cascade of changes, bone loss, muscle atrophy, wandering calcium, altered immunity, cardiovascular deconditioning, and the psychological weight of fragility do not occur in isolation. They interlock. A weaker bone is more likely to fracture if a deconditioned heart makes you dizzy and you fall. A compromised immune system complicates the healing of that fracture. The extra calcium released from the damaged bone may further stress the kidneys. Each system hints at the others, echoing a shared story. The human body is an ecosystem tuned to Earth. On Mars, this ecosystem is asked to function under new rules. It can adapt, but not without cost. Bones may be the most visible symbol of that cost, a measurable loss in density over months and years. Yet they are only the first domino. Once they begin to tilt, the rest of the body quietly, patiently follows. For years, timelines have been drawn like straight lines across the void. SpaceX speaks of crewed missions to Mars in the 2030s. NASA sketches out long-duration stays in the 2040s. Other space agencies and private companies quietly design habitats, life support systems, and entry vehicles as if the calendar alone will carry us there. On paper, the path seems clear. Build the rockets, test the systems, launch the people. But biology does not follow launch windows. The same charts that plot transfer orbits and fuel margins now sit beside a different set of graphs. Curves of bone density loss, trends in fracture risk, models that show a human skeleton after 3 years in Martian gravity, looking less like a colonist and more like a fragile archive of its former self. The engineering might be nearly ready to go. The medicine is still catching up. This mismatch between technical ambition and biological readiness is not a failure. It is a reminder. Space is not just a place we travel through. It is an environment that rewrites the body, line by line, atom by atom. So we come to an uncomfortable question, one that hovers over every plan for a Mars colony like faint dust in thin air. Should we send people, knowing what prolonged Martian gravity could do to their bones? Exploration has always carried risk. Sailors crossed oceans with no guarantee they would ever see land again. Early polar expeditions walked into white horizons, not knowing if there was a way back. Test pilots climbed into aircraft that had flown only in equations. They accepted danger as the price of discovery, often with clear eyes and quiet resolve. Yet there is a difference between risking storms and risking the slow, predictable erosion of your own skeleton. If we send astronauts to Mars for a mission measured in months, we can frame the bone loss as an injury to be treated, a known hazard to be minimized, and then rehabilitated back on Earth. But colonization is not a visit. It is a choice to stay. For one-way settlers, the calculus shifts. The risk is not temporary. It is the baseline of their new life. Imagine signing up not just to leave Earth forever, but to accept that your bones may never truly heal. That the longer you live on Mars, the more your body becomes tuned to that world and estranged from this one. A fracture that might be mild on Earth could become devastating there, where medical facilities are limited, surgery is complex, and supplies come only twice a year when orbits align. Is it ethical to offer that choice? Some would say yes. That adults, fully informed of the dangers, have the right to accept profound risk in pursuit of a dream. Others would argue that when the risks accumulate silently over years, when the damage is subtle and only partially understood, true informed consent becomes more difficult. The story we tell ourselves about heroism and frontier spirit must be balanced against the quiet reality of brittle vertebrae and fragile hips. In the end, the answer may not be a single rule, but a continuing conversation. As our understanding deepens, so must our honesty. We may decide that the first waves of Mars settlers will be pioneers not only of a new world, but of a new kind of medicine. Volunteers living inside a long experiment that will shape the future of every colonist who follows. History offers a word for this tension: acceptable risk. Climbers accept avalanches. Divers accept the pressure of the deep. Astronauts have always accepted launch failures, radiation, and re-entry heat as possibilities written into every mission patch. What changes with Mars colonization is the timescale. This is not risk compressed into minutes at liftoff, but diffused across years of daily life. It is risk that accumulates like dust on a windowsill, almost invisible until you run your hand across it. Perhaps our definition of acceptable risk will expand. Perhaps we will say, yes, we will go, even if it means shorter, more medically complicated lives for the first generation of Martians. Or perhaps we will pause, insisting on partial solutions first. Better artificial gravity, more effective drugs, protective habitats that coax the body into retaining more of its strength. Each delay would not be a retreat, but an act of care toward people we have not yet met. And then there is another possibility, one that stretches beyond a single lifetime. What if Mars is not just a place where Earthborn humans struggle to adapt, but a world where new humans are eventually born? A child who has never known Earth's gravity might grow differently, Their bones might form in response to Martian loads as normal for them, even if those loads would be considered dangerously low for us. Their limbs might be more slender, their movements more fluid in the weaker pull of the planet. Over generations, natural selection and developmental plasticity could shape a population whose skeletons are less vulnerable to the fractures that haunt our models today. This is speculation, but it is grounded in an old pattern. Life on Earth has always adapted to its environment. Fish that colonized land reshaped their fins into limbs. Mammals that returned to the sea turned those limbs into flippers. Our own ancestors thickened or thinned their bones as they shifted from forest to savanna, from walking in trees to walking upright on open ground. Mars would be a different kind of savanna, a place where gravity, radiation, atmosphere and dust together write new instructions into the living record. In time, Martian might not just mean someone who lives on Mars, but someone whose bones, muscles and physiology belong there. For those early colonists, this prospect adds a strange, quiet courage to their decision. They would not only be risking themselves, they would be opening the door for descendants who might never be able to come home, because home for them would be a world where Earth's gravity feels crushing and alien. Yet alongside all these difficult questions, there is room for a softer thought. Humanity has stood before seemingly impossible medical challenges many times. Once, infections turned small wounds into death sentences. Polio paralyzed thousands every year. HIV emerged as a new, terrifying disease. In each case, the solutions were not quick, but they were real. Vaccines, antibiotics, antiretrovirals, technologies and treatments that would have sounded like magic to those who first faced the problem. Bone loss in low gravity may be another of these frontiers. Artificial gravity habitats, gene therapies that tweak bone metabolism, biomaterials that strengthen skeletal structures from within. Today, they are experiments, sketches, and speculative designs. Tomorrow, some of them may be routine. A pill taken with breakfast on Mars, a rotating sleep module that quietly preserves your spine while you dream. So what does all of this mean for Mars colonization dreams? It means they are still alive, still possible, but more complex than a launch countdown. It means that planting a flag in Martian soil is the easy part. The hard part is making sure the people who plant it can bend down to touch the ground without fear that their bones will betray them. Our dreams of Mars will not end because of fragile skeletons. They will deepen. They will become more careful, more compassionate, more attuned to the bodies we carry with us. The red planet will wait. It has waited for billions of years already. In that vast span of time, taking a few extra decades to learn how to protect a human spine is not a delay. It is an act of respect for Mars, for ourselves, and for the generations who may one day call another world home. Long before we send thousands of people to Mars, we have already begun the journey in hospital rooms on Earth. Not rooms of illness, but of deliberate stillness. In facilities quietly tucked away at NASA centers and research hospitals, volunteers agree to something that feels simple, but is, in its own way, as radical as a spacewalk. They lie in bed. Not for a day, not for a week, but for months. Their heads tilted downward at precisely 6 degrees, just enough that their feet are slightly higher than their faces. Just enough to confuse the body into thinking that gravity has changed. At -6 degrees head-down tilt, fluids shift toward the chest and head, much as they do in orbit. Legs unload. The skeleton that once bore the weight of a full human life is suddenly relieved of its daily burden. To an outside observer, nothing seems to happen. The volunteers read, watch movies, talk, fall asleep. But inside their bones, time begins to accelerate. In this quiet theatre of stillness, we rehearse what space will do to us. Bone is a living material that listens obsessively to the story told by gravity. When you stop standing, stop walking, stop using your skeleton as a pillar, and begin using it only as a frame, that story changes. Calcium drifts outward from the bones into the bloodstream. The architecture of the femur and spine thins. The trabecular lattice inside vertebrae, those delicate struts that give bone its strength, starts to erode. What takes years to unfold in orbit can be compressed into weeks in a bed rest study. From the outside, it looks like rest. Inside, it is disassembly. The head-down angle is not arbitrary. 6 degrees is just enough to keep the body's sensors slightly deceived. Baroreceptors that measure blood pressure in the neck and chest begin reporting that there is too much fluid in the upper body. The kidneys respond by shedding water and salt. Blood volume shrinks. Muscles that once subtly engaged to keep us upright fall silent. Astronauts experience similar shifts in the first days of microgravity. The volunteers, still tethered to Earth, are quietly stepping into that same physiology. These studies are our laboratory Mars. Here, we test exercise regimens, nutritional strategies, even medications that might slow bone loss. Some volunteers pedal supine bicycle ergometers, their legs pumping furiously while their heads remain tilted down. Others perform resistive exercises against pneumatic or flywheel devices meant to mimic the pull of free weights without standing. Each protocol is a guess, a hypothesis about how to speak the language of bone in a world where weight has vanished. The results are sobering and instructive. Even with carefully designed exercise, even with protein-rich diets and vitamin D, bone density still declines. Certain regions, hips, lower spine, the neck of the femur, seem particularly stubborn. The skeleton is not easily persuaded to maintain mass when the message from the environment is clear. You are no longer needed to hold anything up. But bed rest is not a perfect mirror of space. Gravity still pulls, even if the body is circumventing it. You can feel the mattress beneath you, the gentle compression of the back against the bed, the weight of blankets. Muscles are resting, not truly floating. There is no constant dance of reorientation, no three-dimensional freedom that turns every motion into a slow ballet. Our terrestrial analogue is close but not complete, so we turn to other natural experiments Earth provides. In Antarctica, winter overcrews live through months of isolation in an environment that might as well be another planet. Outside, the air can kill exposed skin in minutes. The sun disappears for weeks at a time. Inside the stations, days bleed into nights, and the horizon becomes a memory. Here, gravity still holds every body firmly to the ice, but other forces begin to resemble a mission to Mars. Confinement, distance from home, limited medical support, and a psychological timeline that stretches farther than the eye can see. Antarctic crews do not lose bone in the same way astronauts do. They walk, they carry equipment, they climb stairs. Their skeletons are still being asked to perform. Yet the mind experiences something strikingly familiar, the monotony of unchanging surroundings, the weight of responsibility in an unforgiving environment, the slow, subtle reshaping of what normal feels like when the rest of humanity is far beyond the horizon. Submariners provide another fragment of the puzzle. Deep beneath the surface of the ocean, entire crews spend months in steel hulls, their days regimented by artificial schedules, their world reduced to narrow corridors and humming machinery. There is no sunrise, no sunset, no direct view of the natural world. External communication is sparse, often delayed or tightly controlled. Here again, the bones are loaded, gravity presses down. But the psychology, the adaptation to closed spaces, to routine, to dependence on a small group, is a terrestrial echo of a Martian outpost. From these earthbound analogues, we learn about more than biology. We learn about resilience. Studies of Antarctic personnel and submarine crews show that humans can adapt remarkably well to monotony and isolation up to a point. Social cohesion, a sense of purpose, structured work, and the smallest rituals of normal life act like psychological countermeasures. Shared meals, inside jokes, birthday celebrations, even the simple routine of cleaning a common area become anchors. When those anchors fray, stress hormones climb, sleep fractures, mood darkens, and with that, the body's internal chemistry shifts in ways that ripple outward to bone and muscle. Elevated cortisol, altered inflammatory markers, subtle changes in hormones that regulate bone turnover. In bed rest volunteers, similar patterns appear. Even in the controlled calm of a research ward, mental state matters. Motivation, boredom, the feeling of being useful or merely observed, all shape how the body weathers the storm of inactivity. Two volunteers may lie at the same angle for the same duration, yet emerge with different degrees of bone loss, different trajectories of recovery. Biology is not just physics and chemistry, it is biography. Recovery itself is its own journey. When bed rest ends, the volunteers do not simply stand up and walk back into their old lives. The first steps can feel heavy, unsteady. Muscles burn quickly. The cardiovascular system, deconditioned by weeks of reduced demand, races to keep up. Bone, having thinned in the background, does not instantly reverse course when weight-bearing returns. Remodeling is slow, measured in months and years. Some density is regained. Some may be permanently altered. The skeleton remembers. From these experiments, we learn that early reloading, carefully structured, progressively increased, can help reclaim strength and stability. But we also see that there may be windows of opportunity, periods during which lost bone is more easily recovered, and periods after which the architecture has changed enough that full reversal is unlikely. For a Mars mission, 3 years long or more, timing will matter. When to load, how often to rest. The calendar of the journey and the calendar inside the bones must be brought into alignment. Yet for all they teach us, Earth's analogues remain partial. Bed rest reproduces unloading, but not the continuous low gravity of Mars, where every movement still has weight, just 2/3 less than on Earth. Antarctica and submarines echo isolation, but not the knowledge that outside the hatch is not cold or pressure, but vacuum and a sky of dust. No experiment can perfectly combine reduced gravity, radiation, confinement, distance, and the psychological knowledge that rescue is months away at best. We are studying shadows of Mars, not Mars itself. Still, these shadows are valuable. They tell us that bone loss begins early and continues quietly, that the mind and the skeleton are in constant conversation, that recovery is possible but not guaranteed, and that human beings, placed in extreme conditions, can bend without always breaking, if we understand the forces acting upon them. On Earth, we tilt beds, seal hatches, and lock doors against the Antarctic wind, all to glimpse the limits of our adaptation. Each volunteer, each winter-over crew, each submarine patrol becomes a small rehearsal for a future where the stage is another world. From their stillness, we learn how to keep moving. Our bones are not abstract engineering. They are the fossil record of gravity written in living tissue. The curve of your spine, the shape of your pelvis, the thickness of your femur, even the tiny bones of your inner ear that tell you which way is up. All of them are answers to the same ancient question. How do you survive on a world that pulls you down with this strength and no other? When the first fish grew limbs and walked onto land, gravity changed their world from a gentle float to a constant demand. Muscles had to work, skeletons had to harden. Over unimaginable spans of time, bodies responded, not by choice, not by plan, but by the quiet arithmetic of evolution. Those who coped remained, those who didn't vanished. That long dialogue with gravity never stopped. It continued through early primates swinging in trees, through hominins learning to balance on two legs, through farmers stooping to plant seeds, and children running across plains. We like to think of ourselves as adaptable, and we are. We crossed ice sheets, deserts, mountains, oceans. We breathe thin air on high plateaus and dense humid air in rainforests. We endured famine, heat, cold. But all of that exploration unfolded on one stage, under one rule: Earth's pull. Our biology is not generally tuned to space. It is specifically tuned to this planet. Consider how deep that tuning goes. Your heart is sized and shaped to push blood against Earth's gravity column, from your chest up to your brain, your blood pressure reflexes, your leg veins, even the tiny valves inside them are arranged like scaffolding in a building that knows how heavy its own weight will be. Your kidneys adjust your fluid balance because on Earth, standing up briefly pools blood in your legs. Your balance organs assume there is always one reliable direction: down. Change that pull, and all of these quiet assumptions begin to fail. In orbit, we see it quickly. Fluids shift toward the head, faces puff, eyes are squeezed just enough to change vision. In Mars gravity, the effects unfold more slowly, but no less surely. Bones thin, muscles shrink. The very architecture that took millions of years to sculpt under one gravitational constant begins to unwrite itself in a matter of months and years. It invites an almost unsettling question: were we ever meant to leave Earth? The word meant carries more philosophy than science. Evolution has no goal, no final design. It simply preserves what works well enough, long enough, in a given environment. For all of human history, until the last blink of an eye, that environment was this single world. No selection pressure ever sculpted us to endure years in partial gravity or decades in microgravity. There was no advantage on the savannah or in the forest to having bones that could maintain their strength without constant loading. No benefit to a heart that could perfuse a brain effortlessly when weightless. The cosmos beyond our sky did not exist as far as our genes were concerned. So in a narrow biological sense, we were not shaped to leave. We evolved to thrive in a thin shell of air wrapped around a small blue rock at a very particular distance from an ordinary star. And yet, that same evolution placed something else in our skulls: a brain that refuses to accept boundaries as final, the ability to imagine tools, rockets, habitats, medicines, the urge to ask not only where can we live, but where else could we learn to live? Perhaps the deeper question is not, are we meant to leave Earth, but what happens to us if we truly try? If humans one day settle Mars, or build vast rotating habitats with artificial gravity, we may be witnessing the beginning of a new chapter in our own story, not just travel, but divergence. Speciation is a slow, patient process. It does not occur because of one mission or one colony, but because of isolation and time. Generations separated by distance, living under different stresses, exposed to different failures and successes of the body. Imagine, tens of thousands of years from now, a lineage of humans that has never known Earth's full weight. Children born on Mars, whose bones grow in a softer pull, whose muscles, hearts, and inner ears adapt from the very first moments not to Earth's demand, but to Mars' compromise. Their skeletons might become more gracile, their bodies taller, their gait different. The limits that break our Earth-bred bones after 3 years might be simple normality to them, wired in from conception. On a generation ship, or within an enormous rotating habitat simulating gravity through spin, evolution might push in other directions. Perhaps people adapted to subtle Coriolis effects, strange patterns of motion, slightly shifting loads. Over deep time, separate populations, under separate gravities, with limited interbreeding, could drift further apart. Differences in bone density, cardiovascular structure, even basic body proportions might accumulate. We call ourselves one species now because we can all, in principle, return to the same environment and function. But if returning becomes impossible, if bones raised in one gravity crumble in another, that unity begins to blur. The idea that our descendants among the planets might eventually become not only culturally distinct, but biologically distinct, is both unsettling and awe-inspiring. Our greatest barrier to that future is not distance or technology or money. It is our own biology revealing how provincial we really are. The same body that walked us out of Africa, that built cities and telescopes and rockets, is also fragile in ways we did not fully appreciate until we left home. Our skeletons, which feel so solid, are constantly rebuilding themselves in negotiation with Earth's pull. Remove or reduce that pull, and the agreement falls apart. There is a kind of humility in this realization. We are not cosmic natives. We are immigrants, everywhere beyond this sky. The universe does not bend itself to our needs. It simply reveals patiently the conditions under which we can and cannot endure. Yet this is not a reason for despair. Limits define the edges of what is currently possible. Knowing them is the first act of going beyond them. When we discovered that traveling at high speeds degrades the human body in certain ways, we did not abandon the idea of movement. We invented rest stops, stretching, better seats, safer vehicles. When we found microbes that made us sick, we did not accept disease as destiny. We learned hygiene, vaccines, antibiotics. Mars and microgravity are telling us a similar story. Here are the costs. Here is what happens when you ask your Earth-made body to live in a place it did not evolve for. In that story lies an invitation, not a prohibition. We may respond with better exercise systems, with rotating habitats that restore load, with pharmaceuticals that slow bone loss, with gene therapies that one day, carefully and ethically, help future generations adapt in ways we cannot. We may even decide that some worlds are best visited, not inhabited, and turn our creativity toward building homes in space that fit our biology more kindly. The bigger picture is not that we are trapped on Earth, but that we are at the very beginning of understanding what it truly means to be from Earth. Every time an astronaut loses bone mass in orbit, every time we measure how Mars' gravity reshapes the body, we are not just collecting medical data. We are sketching the first rough lines of a new map, a map of human possibility in a universe that does not share our assumptions. We stand on a planet that built us, wondering how far from it we can go without leaving ourselves behind. In that question is vulnerability, but also wonder. Our bones may crumble on Mars today, our hearts may struggle, our physiology may protest, but each failure is a message in a language we are only beginning to read. And as we listen, patiently, across missions and generations, we may find that the same earthbound body that seems like a limitation is also the starting point for many futures, not just one. Futures where human is not a fixed design tied forever to one gravity, but a living, changing lineage learning, slowly, how to belong to more than a single world. On Mars, that conversation changes. The message of gravity becomes faint, like a distant radio signal barely reaching the receiver. Bones that evolved to answer the firm, unyielding pull of Earth are suddenly asked to relearn themselves in a softer, quieter field. For a few weeks, even a few months, they can adapt. But stretch that to 3 years, and we enter a territory no human body has ever truly known. The scaffolding of our skeleton begins to slip out of alignment with the environment it finds itself in. We've seen that bones are not just stone, they are organs. They house marrow, shape blood, cradle immune cells, and whisper instructions to the rest of the body through delicate hormonal signals. Take away enough mechanical load for long enough, and it is not only bone density that yields. It is an orchestra of systems that begins to detune, one instrument at a time. And yet, this is not a story of inevitable failure. All around the world, in labs, clinics, and mission design rooms, people are working late into the night to answer a question humanity has never had to ask before. How do you bring a planet's gravity with you? Some explore spinning habitats that mimic Earth's pull through rotation. Others test drugs that persuade bone cells to behave as if they still feel the weight of a 1G world. Engineers refine exercise devices that can squeeze more mechanical load into every minute. Biologists map the tiny switches inside bone cells that decide whether to build or dismantle. Each experiment, each dataset, is a small lantern lit along a dark, uncertain road. The truth is, we do not yet have a perfect answer. We cannot guarantee that 3 years on Mars will leave a skeleton ready to come home unchanged. But by speaking openly about these limits, we invite more minds into the puzzle. When we share the hard edges of our knowledge, the places where data is thin and questions are thick, we make it more likely that someone, somewhere, will see a path the rest of us have missed. In that way, conversations like this are not just late-night musings. They are a quiet form of participation in the great experiment of leaving our cradle. You, listening now, perhaps lying in the dark, perhaps half asleep, are part of the audience that will decide which risks we accept, which solutions we demand, and how patient we are with the pace of discovery. If this journey through bones and gravity has stirred your curiosity, you can help keep it going. If you'd like, you can tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you don't miss where this story goes next. If you feel comfortable sharing, you might write where in the world you're listening from. City lights, rural quiet, another hemisphere waking up as someone else falls asleep. It's a small reminder that under different skies, we all share the same fragile skeleton, shaped by the same planet's pull. For those who want to support this channel a little more, there is an optional YouTube membership you can join. It's never expected, always appreciated, and it helps carve out more time and space for deep, careful stories like this one. But your presence here, your attention, is already part of the support system that lets these ideas breathe. As we drift toward the end of this episode, think of your bones not as something separate from your mind, but as part of the same frontier. Every future step on Mars begins with the quiet remodeling happening in your skeleton tonight. We may not yet know how to fully protect our bones on another world, but we are learning that the true frontier is not only out there, in red dust and thin air. It is also within us, in the tissues and cells that are constantly negotiating what it means to be human on a particular planet. May your body, Resting now, feel the gentle certainty of earth beneath it. May your sleep be deep, your breathing slow, and your dreams wide enough to hold both home and distant worlds. For now, let gravity cradle you, let your bones listen, and let your curiosity carry you a little farther, even as you drift into rest.